I learned to drink alcohol before I learned to talk about my feelings. So when I went into my senior year of high school, I went into a really deep state of depression. It started off with loneliness and me feeling like this loneliness would go away. It didn't. It built to thoughts of death and suicide every single day, 24 hours a day, but I thought one day I'd wake up and I would want to live again. Unfortunately, that day never came. On January 5th of my senior year, I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life. And when I was hospitalized for trying to kill myself, I wasn't on anyone's radar. I was president of my class, a varsity basketball player. I had the perfect college resume with the highest GPA, an external life that everyone saw and admired, and an internal life filled with pain. I learned two things in my recovery. Number one, I hated myself. There are few things more dangerous than a human being who hates themselves, because when I hated myself, I had no consequences. I drove drunk, I did drugs, I had unprotected sex because I didn't care if I died. The first thing I needed to learn to do was like myself. The second thing I learned in my recovery is that I never chose to have bipolar disorder or trauma, but I could choose to change the way I coped with it. The youth mental health crisis is massive. One of the missing pieces is mental health education. One of the missing pieces is empowering teachers in a way that allows them to talk about this issue, to normalize mental health in entire school culture. And one of the ways to do that is with mental health literacy. For most people in today's society, we think of a mental health spectrum like this. On one side, you have people who don't have issues, and on the other side, you have people with severe mental health disorders. This spectrum sucks for two very big reasons. Number one, I have bipolar disorder. I am also sane at the same time. So if you're framing it this way, it can't work. The other reason this spectrum doesn't work is it promotes the idea that only these people need help and everyone else doesn't. We don't do that with physical health. You're never gonna get advice in your life that's like, hey, you don't need to eat healthily until you get diabetes. You don't need to exercise until you get cancer. With physical health, we're proactive, we're preventative, we promote the concept that it's for everyone and they can do it. We need to change this spectrum to this. On one side, you have people who don't have stressors. They don't have to think about their mental health. These are people we hate, but they exist, so they get a place on the spectrum. Then you have people where it's like difficult to balance. They know their mental health isn't okay, but they're not doing anything about it. Using help to balance could be therapy and medication. It could also just be someone who talks to a friend, goes for a walk, exercises, reads a book, does anything. Constant assistance could be a treatment program or family support. Unable to balance could be someone who had trauma or is suicidal, but they can't balance their mental health. We need to put using help in the middle because that's where it is for physical health. The other thing we need to do in mental health literacy is explain the difference between someone who is nervous and someone who has an anxiety disorder, someone who feels depressed and someone who has clinical depression, someone who has a body image issue and someone who has an eating disorder, someone who has a normal thought about death and someone who has a plan to take their own lives. A lot of us, when we think about adolescence, we think about hormones and scary times and changes, but adolescence is a time for opportunity. The second largest period of time of brain growth in our lives is between 12 and 25. What happens between 12 and 25 often lasts for a lifetime. I often joke with people that adulthood is really just trying to undo adolescence, because it is. If we can start using mental health literacy in effective ways, we can make a big change, but none of this changes without all of you finding a way to share your story. I would not be on this stage today at all if I didn't have the support of a teacher when I was in high school. Because after I got out of the hospital for trying to kill myself and went back to high school, everything changed for me. The whole school started calling me a psycho and a crazy kid, and I was bullied, and I lost my friends. And 2 months after I got out of the hospital, a psychologist came into one of my classrooms to talk about the patients he was treating. And as he talked about the patients he was treating, every single kid in that classroom started laughing, except me, because I was tired of being laughed at. And I took my teacher into the hallway and I said, hey, this isn't funny to me. And he looked down at me and he said, what do you want to do about it? And I said, let me speak. And he said, okay. And 2 weeks later, I stood up in that exact same classroom and I spoke for the very first time. And I learned at a young age that when you share your story, it opens people to sharing theirs. That teacher brought me back into his classroom for the next 5 years to share my story as I was trying to figure out my life. That teacher looked me in the eyes when I hated myself and said, I love you. That teacher looked me in the eyes when I didn't believe in myself and said, I believe in you. It is not lost on me that today I am that teacher. That I look into the eyes of my students and tell them I support them and believe in them. But all of you sitting here can play that role. You can empower others, you can love others, you can give them an opportunity to hear their voice, and you can use your own voice. Because it takes far more strength to talk about these issues than it does to hide them. It takes far more strength to uncover these issues than it does to bury them. You have no idea where your story can take you until you tell it.